Mr. Edgar, there's Mr. Edgar. Members, for those of you who have not met him yet, Mr. Edgar is the current chair of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, former city manager of Sacramento, and well-known in this region, and a previous member of the old Reclamation Board, which was the entity that preceded the Flood Protection Board. Mr. Edgar.
Thank you, Chair Eisenberg, members of the Delta Stewardship Council. My name is Bill Edgar. As Phil indicated, I am the president of the...
Yeah, but you've got to have the mic right in front of your... Yep. Okay. Even if you can't read your notes.
I have with me this afternoon Tim Ramirez, who is also a recently appointed and confirmed member of the board.
This is the high-energy younger member of the board?
Yes, right.
Okay.
And our chief engineer, Len Marino, is also here. Mr. Eisenberg, we'll be speaking on the regulations portion of this public meeting. As an introduction, I don't think it's any secret to anyone that most of the appointments of the flood board have been done less than a year ago. And quite frankly, we've been drinking from a fire hose since that time. We were thrown into a very difficult and contentious plan adoption process. And after 6 months of pretty hard work and a lot of support locally and regionally, we were able to have the plan adopted in June, which is an on-time plan adoption, and we also now have a certified environmental document. And I believe of all the plans we're talking about, the water plan, the Delta plan, the BDCP, and flood plan, and so on, this is the only adopted plan with a certified environmental document that we have so far. In addition to the plan adoption process, we were kind of thrown a curveball by the Corps of Engineers. And I don't know whether you read that in the paper or not, but after a series of inspections of all the levees, we estimate, by the way, that there are probably 95% of all the levees in our system that does not meet the Corps standards. Therefore, they have started a process whereby they are incrementally removing reaches of the levees from the PL 8499 program, which is, as you probably know, the program which gives federal money to local agencies to rebuild levees after floods. So this is a pretty big deal for us. Particularly the local LMAs who are concerned about that. Anyway, we've been fighting with them and going back and forth and talking about fixing levees, what we do about illegal encroachments that are illegal that have in fact been permitted, which is an interesting concept, and a number of other issues. And the so-called U.S. Corps of Engineers variance process, which is called a SWIFT, System-Wide Improvement Framework, that Department of Water Resources hates because it kind of diverts us from the implementation of the plan. But anyway, the Corps of Engineers is dealing with that. We understand now that the Corps is requiring a SWIFT on almost every permit that you seek from the Corps, even though it's not statutorily permitted or required or anything else. For example, the 408 process, which is the federal process for reviewing flood improvements. For example, SAFCA in the Thomas area has done that. Sabufka is working on a 408 process. And the 104 process, which is the reimbursement process, that we spend money first and get Corps money later, they are requiring that a SWIFT be included in that process, which is a new and emerging requirement. Mr. Eisenberg, the bottom line is that our board has not focused on the issue of coordinating our flood plan implementation efforts with all the other plans that are going on. I mean, we received a staff, now that our plan has been adopted, our big issue now is how does this plan fit in to all these other plans? And do they work? And what do we mean? Well, we are right now implementing a very robust process of regional planning. The flood plan called for 9 regional planning efforts in 9 regions. We're down to 6 areas now. Some have been consolidated and went back and forth. We now have 6 planning areas throughout the system in which the plan is going to be implemented. Bottom line is they are preparing their plans, their regional plans. The Department of Water Resources will be, in fact, influencing those regional plans by commenting on the need for system-wide improvements, and FSRO, which is an organization that is run by the Department of Water Resources. I think it stands for Flood Safe Environmental Stewardship something or other office. But whatever that is, they are going to be coming out with their environmental goals and objectives, and they, of course, also have to be involved in the plan. Now, all of this said, as we move toward design of projects and implementation planning and toward construction, we are going to have to figure out how these plans, how these implementation, who gets what permit from what, and how these all work with all these other plans that are going on. And to be honest, I don't have a clue how that's going to happen. Gary Bardini in Department of Water Resources has a vision for how this is all going to work, but you got me how it's all going to work. And it may work. And he's tried to explain it to me, and I don't understand it, but he's good at it, so he can do that. We had a presentation at our board meeting this morning given by the department on how the water management plan is going to integrate all of these different plans that are going on. And we were told this morning that nobody's statutory authority, nobody's current area of responsibilities and jurisdictions are going to change. We are going to work together, is what we were told. Well, that's fine. And that's what we want to do. But getting back to the subject at hand, which is the Delta Stewardship Council's proposed regulations, we had, for the board, the new board, we had our presentation given by the staff yesterday. It raised some concerns about regarding the regulations, namely inconsistencies. This was in the staff report, and I don't know whether this is true or not. We haven't had time to really look at it. But raised a lot of concerns regarding the regulations, the inconsistencies between the board's Central Valley Flood Protection Title 23 regulations and those proposed by the Stewardship Council staff, overlapping responsibilities and the need for jurisdictional authority between the board and the council, and inconsistencies with existing state laws and regulations, and the need for definitional clarity was raised. So after some discussion at the board meeting yesterday, and I believe Tim Ramirez can correct me if I'm wrong, that the board did not believe that the legal counsel had the appropriate time to analyze our staff comments, nor has the board had an opportunity to properly consider the issues raised. DWR's legal counsel was at the meeting and expressed some concerns about these kinds of issues, and they will be submitting comments to you by your deadline, and probably be making appearance at your public meeting on the 24th, is what we were told. So now some of the board members and staff have asked that I ask you for a continuance or postponement of the deadline for comments. I'm not going to do that because I don't think you'll grant it, number one. And number two, I'm not sure you should. When our friend Melinda Terry asked us whether we would grant an extension for the flood plan decision, we said no. And the reason we said no is because we were up against the statutory deadline and a lot of pressure to get it adopted and so on. And I'm sure that's what the situation is. So I'm not going to ask for an extension, but we are going to ask for the ability, and I think your staff has already offered that ability to work with the board and try to, number one, work out these alleged inconsistencies or issues that have been identified by some of the attorneys. And to that end, we are going to submit kind of a general letter by your deadline outlining some of the issues that we see on the regulations. We will establish a board committee to accompany our staff so that the board is more up to speed on these issues, and we'll try to get them resolved in more of a face-to-face discussion and meetings rather than everybody lawyering up and, slugging it out, because I don't think that's going to help anybody. So that's what we're proposing to do, and we'll then hopefully follow up with a more detailed letter and so on. And we'd request your that you consider the comments and suggestions, and you work with us to see if we can make these things work out. Now, frankly, you're going to get a lot of comments on these kinds of issues. Well, wait a minute, the flood board says, the Title 23 for the flood board says this, and yours says this, and they're inconsistent. You're going to get a lot of that, I'm sure, from DWR, and a little bit from us, but quite frankly, we're not as far along as they are. They've been working on this for some time. On existing authorities, on overlap of responsibilities, and all of that is going to come before you. And those issues really need to be worked out and resolved, I think, on face-to-face examples. But I'm less interested in that as I am process. How is all this going to work? For example, we have authority over permitting encroachments on levees project levees defined by the system. That's what we do. We also enforce encroachments. I'm not doing a great job with that, but that's what we're supposed to be doing. So the question is, if somebody comes in, makes a permit application to us to do some improvements, minor improvements, major improvements, whatever they are to the levees, or in the case of, we found one encroachment in Cache Creek where a person actually dug into the levee and put in a wine cellar. So
probably pretty cool.
We've got to do a better job in enforcing those kinds of things. But the fact of the matter is, people don't get it. I mean, these are our first lines of public safety. You don't put wine cellars, dig out a well, and you don't put swimming pools, embed swimming pools into levees. We just anecdotally, we took a look at the little pocket here, and what's the universe?
Not far from where Mr. Edgar himself lives.
I know. But what's the universe of the problem? We don't even know. We don't know what the encroachment problem is. We don't have a database. We don't have a map. We don't know. And that's going to take a lot of work to figure out. But anecdotally, in 6 miles of the pocket area that we did look at, just as an example, there were 23 swimming pools. many of which were encroaching into the clearance area, some of which were actually embedded into the levees. Now, I guess if you keep the swimming pool filled, it'd be okay, but you know how that works. So anyway, there's a lot of problems here, and I'm interested in somebody coming in, asking us for a permit, or we're required to enforce an encroachment in the delta. How does that work exactly? Somebody submits a permit to us, we review it, and I guess we would send it on to you to make a finding of compliance with the delta plan. And then,
Mr. Edgar, I'd like to renew a suggestion we made long before you and Mr. Ramirez were appointed to the board. One of the other current board members, Mr. Valine, and staff had come over and visited, and we had mentioned that we had already entered into memorandums of agreement with the Bay Delta Conservation Commission and what's now called the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the state of California, essentially setting up a process of review, contact, evaluation. And we've kind of generally made that offer both to the board but also to other state and agencies and even local agencies. I think there is a lot to be said for that approach for your consideration.
Yeah, you have offered that, as I understand it, from the staff. We have taken a look at that. It has to be a lot more specific as to describing the process. The Title 20. Now you know me. You know,
I do.
I'm a city manager, right? I know. I need to know how things are going to work, Phil. I mean, this stuff of policy and planning is fine, but tell me how it's going to work. As somebody comes in for an application, go through the process, which people hate, right? By the way, they think it's too long. They think it's onerous.
Right.
We don't, and we're proposing that we charge for it. I've never heard of a system where you give free, where you never collect a fee for a permit. We never did that at the city, for heaven's sake. You come in you pay for it.
Never?
Never.
Okay.
Well, you shouldn't anyway. But, you know, they hate it. They hate the time process. They hate the whole thing. And I think the memorandum of agreement has to be done. We were told this morning that's kind of where everybody's going. They need to get together on these. They have to begin to manage horizontally, not vertically. That's exactly what we need to do. But still, this process to me is going to add time, and which will drive everybody crazy.
Well,
so we need to do something to fix that.
Even before the new members of the board were appointed, I never thought that there were fundamental barriers between the council's activity, the new legislation that created us and gave us our duties, and the flood board. It just seems to me they're compatible. You do, however, have a geographical range of activity up and down the Central Valley that is outside our statutory directed area, and conversely, we have territory that's not within the flood board's authority, kind of the heritage of government setting up multiple agencies to do similar kinds of things. So I'm confident that we can resolve some of these issues, and we benefited from the letters that actually cranked out of the flood board in 2011, 2012 on the plan, the environmental impact report, and so on.
Yeah, as I say, I think those problems can be worked out, Phil. I'm interested in process. I just really, the Title 23 specific is very specific, and I know Chris has looked at those, and you're both Chris's, I mean, have always looked at Title 23. Very specific as to what's required and so on. And we'll have to get into that kind of detail to deal with this, I believe, and we need to do that.
Mr. Natoli?
Yeah, well, just in light of what Bill's outlined, and certainly having a little bit of background, certainly from this council's work, but also obviously in other realms, I think that, one, I wanted to say I appreciate Bill being here on behalf of the board, and certainly his work in leadership in this arena. And I think he's certainly talked to some of the challenges that his board and colleagues, and certainly the entity that he's responsible for, have and the ones they coordinate with. But I think this understanding the implications of plans and policies is very important, particularly at the practical level. I guess I come from kind of the local government perspective, is that not only what the intended consequence is and the intended outcomes, but also when I hear words, and I think Bill pick and chose these words pretty carefully, but inconsistency, overlap, lack of clarity, those things aren't without the ability to be resolved. But I think it takes work, it takes understanding, and I think within the institutional frameworks at which a lot of folks work, that for the party who is the permittee, that's where it really meets, the rubber meets the road. And when when maybe they don't want to be before you to begin with, but they have to by virtue of getting a permit and doing things properly, and then you add time to that, you add cost to it, and then and if there wasn't cost before, now I'm paying you to frustrate me more and delay me more. I mean, all built into that mentality, and yet you want people to do the right thing. You want the agencies to enforce their requirements properly and fairly. And so I guess I would just say to your request, it seems to me to be one that's reasonable, and I know that Phil weighed in, and I think certainly the understanding that we have from what you've portrayed today is one where there needs to be some work certainly at the respective staff level. But as we go forward and consider these regulations, I think it's going to be important to know, as I said a moment ago, the implications and what it means to folks at the ground level of those, whether it be agencies, but certainly in a lot of cases individuals, some organizations that are going to be seeking permits from your body, and obviously we may from time to time come before this council for review of either consistency and or other certifications. So I concur, and I think that it's probably everybody's best interest to do that sooner rather than later, Bill. So I think what you've offered today is important, and hopefully Chris and our staff will latch on to that quickly.
Okay, Ms. Gray.
Oh.
Don't
Don't touch it.
don't touch it.
I don't listen to Phil very well.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Thanks. I want to thank you for coming this afternoon. I think one of the things that are very important, and I've heard basically kind of the same anxieties that a lot of folks have about the plan, is that they're still not sure, in fact, how things will work. And I think you make that point very well today. And I know there's an implementation committee that will be part of the process once the plan is approved. But perhaps there's a need to have a workshop that will clearly state, figure out what the process is, what role we play, what role your board plays, or any other agency as it looks at different parts of the plan. So perhaps that's something the council can consider as we move on, because it's a great accomplishment to approve a plan, and folks have been a part of the process. But if people don't really understand how things work, then it's not always clear that people are supported or really will move forward in a positive way. So I think that's a very important element of it. And so I think it's at some point the council needs to consider something like that as part of moving on after the plan is completed.
Would certainly be happy to participate in something like that, Ms. Gray. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Okay.